Lauren had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Myra would be forced to stand before the council and defend her beliefs. He had always known it was coming, but that didn't make the weight of the moment any lighter. Myra would need to prove not only that she was a skilled warrior, but also that she had the wisdom to lead, to challenge tradition, and to shape the future of the empire. The morning of the council meeting arrived, and as Lauren and Myra entered the grand hall, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The floor beneath them was made of polished obsidian, reflecting the light from the massive torches that lined the walls. The High Council sat at a long, elevated table, their eyes fixed on Myra as she approached with Lauren by her side. At the far end of the room stood Emperor Thorok, watching his daughter carefully. Korak was seated among the council members, his eyes narrowed as he watched Myra enter. His posture was stiff, his arms crossed, a silent challenge in the way he stared at her. Lauren could see the subtle signs of discontent brewing in Korak's expression. This was not going to be an easy meeting. "Welcome, Princess Myra," said the Emperor, his voice deep and commanding, reverberating through the vast chamber. "We have gathered today to discuss your progress, your future, and the path forward for the Empire." Myra stood tall, her expression firm yet calm. She had learned over the past weeks that the key to leadership was composure. She met the eyes of the council members, but her gaze lingered on Korak. She could sense his distrust. It was clear that the challenge would come from him. "Your Majesty," Myra began, her voice steady, "I stand before you today not as a princess but as a warrior, one who has learned from the wisdom of those who have walked a different path. I ask that you consider the future of our people and the strength that comes not just from our bodies, but from our minds." Korak scoffed loudly, his voice booming across the hall. "A warrior who relies on tricks and mind games is no warrior at all. You dishonor the Dravari traditions, Princess. We fight with strength and honor, not with strategies." Myra's eyes narrowed slightly, but she held her ground. "Strength without purpose is nothing but raw power," she retorted. "It is strategy that turns that power into victory. It is adaptability that ensures survival." Lauren, standing beside her, could feel the growing tension in the room. Korak's followers were listening closely, some nodding in agreement, while others remained silent, unsure of where they stood. But Myra wasn't about to back down. This was her moment. This was the time for her to prove that strength was not the only measure of a warrior. "I have trained with the finest warriors in the Empire," Myra continued. "But it is only through adaptation that we will thrive in the future. If we continue to rely solely on the methods of the past, we will never move forward. The galaxy is changing. The Varkari grow bolder by the day. We must evolve if we are to survive." Korak stood up abruptly, his fist slamming against the table with such force that the sound echoed through the hall. "You speak of survival, but you dishonor everything we stand for. You want to weaken us, to turn us into something unrecognizable. I will not stand for it." Myra's expression hardened, but she did not falter. "I am not weakening us, Korak. I am making us stronger. Adaptability is what will ensure our survival, not the blind worship of tradition." The council members murmured among themselves, some clearly moved by Myra's words, others still hesitant. The debate raged on for what felt like hours, with Korak and Myra both standing firm in their beliefs. Finally, the Emperor raised his hand, silencing the room. "It is clear," Thorok said, his voice cutting through the tension, "that we stand at a crossroads. We must choose the path forward. Myra, you have proven that you have the mind of a true leader, and Korak, you have proven that you will not accept change easily." He turned to the council. "But change is inevitable. It is time we decide whether to embrace it or resist it." The room fell silent as Thorok's words hung in the air. Myra's heart raced as she waited for the final judgment. She could feel the eyes of every council member on her, their decision weighing heavily on the future of the Dravari Empire. Finally, Thorok spoke again, his voice resolute. "Let it be known that from this day forward, the Dravari Empire will Move toward a new era. We will combine strength with strategy. We will embrace change, and with it we will become more than we were. Korak's face was dark with anger, but he did not argue. The decision had been made. As the council session ended, Myra turned to Lauren, a mixture of relief and pride flooding through her. She had done it. She had faced the greatest challenge of her life, and she had proven that the future of the Defies Empire lay not in the strength of their bodies but in the power of their minds. But even as she stood victorious, she knew that this was only the beginning. There were still those who would resist. There were still battles to be fought. And the greatest test of all was yet to come. As Myra and Lauren walked away from the council chambers, Myra's voice was quiet but firm. This is just the start. We have a long road ahead of us, but together, we'll change the Empire. Lauren smiled. You've already changed it more than you know. And as the sun set over the Defies capital, the Empire was forever changed. The warriors of the old ways had seen the dawn of a new era, and the stars themselves seemed to shift, marking the beginning of something greater. The true battle was far from over, but with Myra's leadership and Lauren's guidance, there was hope that the Defies Empire would rise stronger than ever before. Torin raised an eyebrow at the human's words. Untouched by humans, and yet you live here? Ryan chuckled, clearly understanding Torin's confusion. Humans can live with nature if we want to. We've got our cities and technology, sure, but not everything needs to be a war on the planet. He gestured to the forest around them. This is proof that we can coexist. Coexist, Torin murmured to himself. The word was foreign to him. His people, the Zvarians, were technologically advanced, but had never learned to coexist with other species. They had conquered planets, erased those who didn't align with their vision. Now here he was, on a world that seemed to balance the natural with the man-made. What's it like where you come from? Ryan asked after a moment, his voice sincere. Where do you call home? Torin hesitated. It was an unexpected question, and one he had never considered asking himself. His home had always been a series of missions, one planet after another. There had never been a permanent place to return to, only the cold, vast expanse of space. I come from Zarex, a planet far from here, he finally said. It's a world of great technology, but it's not a place for feelings or connections. He looked at Ryan. We do not coexist. We conquer. We take. That doesn't sound like a place to call home, Ryan said quietly, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. It sounds like a place of fear. Torin glanced at Ryan, surprised by the insight in his words. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe that's why I don't know what to do here. Well, Ryan replied with a grin, you'll figure it out. Humans aren't perfect, but we try to do what's right. Sometimes we mess up, but that's just part of living here. The conversation lingered in Torin's mind as they moved deeper into the woods. Ryan's perspective on life seemed so simple, yet so different from what Torin had been taught. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but there was something raw about their spirit, something Torin couldn't fully understand. As night began to fall, Ryan led Torin to a small clearing, where they set up a campfire. The orange glow of the fire illuminated their faces, casting flickering shadows on the trees around them. Torin sat down across from Ryan, watching him carefully as he began to prepare a simple meal. You must be hungry, Ryan said, offering Torin a piece of bread he had pulled from his bag. It's not much, but it'll keep you going. Torin stared at the bread for a moment before cautiously taking it. The texture was unfamiliar to him, but he was too tired to care. He took a tentative bite. To his surprise, it wasn't bad. It was soft, chewy, and comforting. He chewed slowly, looking at Ryan, who was watching him intently. Not bad, Torin muttered, his voice tinged with surprise. Ryan grinned. Told you it was good. He sat back, stretching his legs out in front of him. You might not get used to everything here, but you'll learn. And you've got me to show you the ropes. Torin didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked into the fire, lost in thought. He had always believed that being alone was the only way to survive. Yet here, on this strange planet, surrounded by a human who seemed willing to help him, Torin wondered if he had been wrong all along. "Thank you," Torin said quietly, his voice soft but sincere. "For helping me." Ryan smiled. "No problem. I can't leave a guy like you stranded out here." For the first time since his crash, Torin allowed himself to feel a sense of relief. He wasn't alone anymore, and maybe, just maybe, this planet wasn't as dangerous as he had been led to believe. The days passed quietly in the dense woods of Earth, and Torin found himself slowly adjusting to this strange world. Despite the harshness of his crash landing, the time spent with Ryan in the wilderness was turning out to be less terrifying than he had imagined. While he had no idea what his future held, one thing was clear. He was beginning to feel a strange sense of attachment to this planet and the human that had come to his aid. Ryan had been patient with him, teaching him the basics of survival on Earth. Each morning they ventured into the forest together to gather food. Ryan showed Torin how to identify edible plants and fruits, how to set traps for small game, and how to navigate the terrain. Torin had always prided himself on his ability to survive in any environment, but there was something about Earth that made him feel uncertain. Every time he reached for a new plant or animal, he wondered if he was making a mistake. "This one's safe," Ryan said one morning, pointing to a berry bush. "But that one," he added, pointing to a similar-looking bush nearby, "will make you sick if you eat it." Torin eyed the two bushes carefully, trying to determine the difference. His sharp eyes caught the subtle difference in the leaves. One set had slightly jagged edges while the other was smooth and round. He nodded, impressed. "I see," he said, his voice quiet but thoughtful. "It's all about learning to read the land," Ryan explained as he moved on, bending down to gather more food. "The more you observe, the more you begin to understand." Torin paused for a moment, then crouched down beside Ryan, inspecting the ground around them. He hadn't realized how much attention Ryan had paid to every detail. The way he could read the environment with such ease was unlike anything Torin had ever encountered. Back home on Zarex, everything was planned, controlled, and measured. There were no surprises, no uncertainties. But here, with Ryan, everything felt different. Everything was new. As they continued to forage and explore the forest, Torin became more attuned to the sounds of Earth's wildlife. He heard the chirping of strange birds high in the trees, the rustling of leaves as small creatures scurried along the forest floor, and the distant sound of water flowing in a nearby river. Despite the occasional discomfort of his unfamiliar surroundings, Torin found himself appreciating the serenity of the planet. The gentle breeze, the rustling leaves, the songs of unknown birds. It was a far cry from the sterile, controlled environment of Zarex. One evening, as they sat by the campfire, Ryan told Torin about his life. He spoke of his family, of his childhood growing up in a small village near the forest, and of the tragedies he had faced. How his parents had passed away when he was just a teenager, leaving him to fend for himself. Torin listened intently, unsure how to respond. He had never been close to anyone, not like Ryan seemed to be with the memories of his family. For Torin, relationships had always been temporary, based on duty and survival. Emotions were something he had been taught to suppress. "It's not always easy, but you learn to keep going," Ryan said, his voice quieter now. "Sometimes you just have to take one day at a time. You have no choice but to adapt." Torin nodded thoughtfully. He understood the concept of survival, but he had never really considered how much emotional strength it took. He had always relied on his skills and training, believing that surviving meant doing everything alone. But Ryan's words struck him deeply. Adapting wasn't just about physical survival. It was about finding strength in difficult circumstances. It was about enduring the emotional weight of life. "You're a survivor," Ryan added, his eyes meeting Torin's. "We all are." The words hung in the air, and Torin found himself reflecting on the meaning of survival in a new light. Back on Zarex, survival was a matter of physical strength and intelligence. But here on Earth, it seemed to require something more, something that Torin had never truly understood. The following day, after their routine of foraging and hunting, Ryan took Torin to a small river that ran through the forest. The water was clear and cold, rushing over smooth stones and creating a gentle melody as it flowed. Ryan dropped down to the water's edge and cupped his hands, taking a drink. Torin hesitated for a moment before kneeling beside him, looking at the water carefully. He had never been much for drinking from natural sources, always relying on purified, controlled supplies. "It's safe," Ryan said with a grin, sensing Torin's hesitation. "Trust me." Torin leaned forward and took a tentative sip, his eyes widening slightly as he tasted the fresh, cool water. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The water was crisp, pure, and refreshing. For a moment, Torin closed his eyes, savoring the simplicity of the moment. It felt peaceful, more peaceful than he had ever felt before. As they sat by the river, Ryan started to speak again, his voice thoughtful. "You know, we humans are not perfect, but we do try. We try to learn, to grow. We make mistakes, sure, but that's what makes us who we are." Torin nodded slowly, his mind racing. He had heard much about the imperfection of humans, about their flaws and unpredictability. But now, sitting beside Ryan by the river, he began to see that there was more to them than he had been taught. Maybe humans weren't as chaotic as the Severians believed. Maybe they had a kind of strength that he had never understood. "You're not like what I was told," Torin said after a long silence. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Ryan looked at him with a curious expression. "And what were you told?" "That humans are wild," Torin began, choosing his words carefully. "Unpredictable. Dangerous." He looked away, his gaze shifting to the river. "But I don't think that's true." Ryan smiled softly. "Yeah, well, not all of us are dangerous," he said. "But we've got our problems like anyone else." There was a pause as Torin considered this. The fire of the camp flickered in the distance, casting soft shadows around them. In the quiet of the forest, Torin realized something. He had been wrong. Humans weren't the unpredictable, dangerous creatures the Zverians had made them out to be. They had flaws, yes, but they were also capable of kindness, understanding, and resilience. And here, with Ryan, Torin felt like he had found something he hadn't realized he was searching for. A connection. "Thank you," Torin said quietly, his voice full of sincerity. Ryan raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For showing me that humans are not what I thought they were," Torin replied. Ryan smiled, his eyes warm. "Well, I guess that's something, isn't it?" Torin nodded, a small, genuine smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For the first time since arriving on Earth, he didn't feel quite so alone. And maybe, just maybe, he could learn to live in a world that wasn't so different from his own after all. The morning after their quiet reflection by the river, Torin and Ryan packed up their small camp, gathering their things and preparing for another day in the forest. Despite the growing comfort of their newfound companionship, there was an underlying tension in the air. Torin knew that Ryan was a good person, but the reality of his situation on Earth was far from settled. There was still the matter of his ship being beyond repair, of his being stranded on a strange planet, and of the unknown forces at play in the world he had crash-landed on. Ryan, too, seemed lost in thought as they made their way through the dense woods. He didn't speak much that morning, a stark contrast to his usual light-hearted demeanor. Torin noticed the change, but didn't press him. There was a growing bond between them, but even that wasn't enough to erase the feeling that something was off. They reached the clearing where Ryan had set up their camp just days earlier. As Torin helped Ryan collect the last of the supplies, he felt something odd, a change in the air, a new presence lurking just beyond the trees. Before he could act on it, the sound of footsteps reached his ears. They were too deliberate, too heavy to be the usual forest creatures. "Stay close," Torin murmured to Ryan, his voice low, his hand instinctively going to the energy blade strapped to his side. Ryan's eyes widened at the sudden shift in Torin's demeanor. He had learned to trust his companion's instincts, but he didn't know what had changed. "What's going on?" Ryan whispered, his body tense. Torin stepped into the center of the clearing, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods. Someone is coming, he said simply, his voice steady but his mind racing. His training told him to remain calm, to observe, and yet there was something about this encounter that felt wrong. Within moments, 3 figures appeared, emerging from the trees. They wore dark clothing, their faces obscured by masks. Their movements were calculated, precise. Torin's instincts screamed that they were not here by accident. These people weren't just travelers, they were hunters. Torin, who are they? Ryan asked, stepping forward, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and confusion. The figures didn't answer at first. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Torin. "We know what you are," he said coldly. "You don't belong here, alien." The word hung in the air, and Torin could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. It was a word he had heard many times before in his life, but never like this. These humans knew more than they were letting on, and the way they spoke, their tone, their body language, told Torin that they didn't see him as a lost traveler. To them, he was a threat. "You don't belong either," Torin replied, his voice steady, though his mind raced. He was outnumbered, and while he was more than capable of defending himself, he wasn't here to fight. He had no intention of hurting anyone. "We don't care about your laws," the man with the scar said, his voice low and threatening. "This planet is ours. We will not allow your kind to invade." Ryan stepped forward, his eyes wide with panic. "What do you mean? Invade? We're not here to hurt anyone. Torin just crash-landed, okay? We're not looking for trouble." The scarred man's eyes flickered toward Ryan, then back to Torin. "You are the trouble, alien. We've been watching your ship for days. You've been here too long." Torin took a step back, his mind working quickly to assess the situation. He could tell these humans were more than just ordinary civilians. There was something about their demeanor, something about their readiness, that screamed military. Or perhaps something worse. "You're the ones who have been following us," Torin said, his voice hardening. "Why?" The scarred man smirked, but there was no humor in it. "We are part of a group called the Pureborn," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "We are the protectors of this planet, and we don't allow outsiders like you to roam free. Not after what your kind has done." Torin's blood ran cold. He had been taught that humanity was unpredictable, but nothing had prepared him for this. The mention of the Pureborn sent a chill down his spine. He had heard rumors of radical, human factions, groups that saw outsiders as a threat to their very survival, but to face them now in the heart of the forest was something else entirely. "You're not welcome here, alien," the scarred man continued, his hand reaching for the weapon at his side. "Leave, or we'll make you." Torin's hand moved, instinctively to his blade, his eyes narrowing as he prepared to fight. But just as quickly as the tension had risen, the air seemed to shift. A figure stepped forward from behind the group of hunters. She was tall, with short, dark hair and piercing green eyes. Her expression was calm, but there was something unmistakably authoritative about her. "Enough, Tyron," the woman said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Let him go." The scarred man, Tyron, glared at the woman, clearly reluctant to back down. "You can't be serious, Amara. This alien is a threat. We can't just let him roam free." "He's not a threat," Amara replied firmly, her gaze never leaving Tyran's. "Not unless you want him to be. We've seen his ship. It's a crash landing, and he's not here to invade." There was a long silence, the two staring each other down. Finally, Tyran let out a frustrated sigh. "Fine," he muttered, his hand falling away from his weapon. "But mark my words, Amara. This alien's presence will bring trouble." Amara turned to Torin, her eyes softening slightly. "You're lucky I found you first," she said, her tone softer but still firm. "But you won't be safe here. For long. Not with the Pureborn after you." Torin felt a wave of relief wash over him, though he knew better than to fully trust anyone, especially under these circumstances. "Thank you," he said cautiously. Amara nodded, her gaze flickering, to Ryan, who was still standing beside Torin, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. "You're not alone, but you're not safe either," she said, her tone serious. You need to leave. Now. I can help you. But you need to trust me. Torin didn't hesitate. He had no choice but to trust her. The pureborn were already on their tail, and this was no longer just about surviving the wilderness. They needed to find a way off this planet fast. But the dark presence of the pureborn would hang over them, watching their every move. The true battle was just beginning. And Torin knew as he turned to follow Amara into the depths of the forest that the fight for survival had just become far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The days that followed were filled with tension, but also moments of unexpected calm. Torin, Ryan, and Amara had managed to evade the pureborn for now, but the looming threat of the faction's relentless pursuit hung over them like a storm cloud. Each day brought new challenges, whether it was scavenging for food in the forest, avoiding detection, or finding shelter in places that could offer them protection. But through it all there was a bond forming between them, a bond that went beyond mere survival. Amara had proven to be more than just a mysterious figure from the woods. As Torin spent more time with her, he learned she was not only a skilled survivalist but also someone deeply connected to the land. She had a quiet strength about her, a wisdom that came from years of living on the fringes of society. Although she hadn't revealed much about her past, her actions spoke volumes. She was fiercely protective, yet not without compassion. It was this compassion that led her to protect Torin, even when it meant defying the pureborn, a group she had once been a part of. Over time, Torin found himself opening up to her more. He shared stories of his home on Zarex, of the cold, calculating way in which his people had ruled the galaxy. He spoke of the isolation he had always felt, even among his own kind. For the first time in his life, Torin realized that he had never truly known what it was to be accepted. His existence had always been about duty, about fulfilling his role as a scout for the Zvarians. Emotions, connections, they were luxuries he had never allowed himself. Amara listened intently, her green eyes reflecting an understanding he hadn't expected from anyone, especially a human. When Torin finished speaking, she didn't say anything right away. Instead, she simply nodded as if processing everything he had shared. Then, without warning, she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. Her words, simple as they were, carried more weight than Torin could have ever anticipated. He had always been alone, drifting from one mission to the next, never staying in one place long enough to form connections. But now, in this strange forest on an unfamiliar planet, he felt something he had never truly felt before: belonging. As the days passed, Torin began to let his guard down just a little. Ryan, too, became a more integral part of their small group. The human had proven himself time and again, whether it was by helping Torin craft makeshift tools or by defending Amara when the pureborn had gotten too close. His loyalty to Torin and Amara was unquestionable despite the risks. One evening, as they gathered around a campfire, Ryan spoke up, his voice breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "You know," he said, looking at Torin and Amara, "I never thought I'd be doing something like this, helping an alien, surviving in the wild, avoiding groups like the pureborn. It's all pretty wild." Torin smiled faintly, his eyes flicking to Amara before returning to Ryan. "Life has a way of throwing unexpected things our way," he said quietly. "But sometimes, those unexpected things are the ones that shape us." Ryan raised an eyebrow, his expression curious. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Torin began, "that perhaps we're not as different as we think we are. When I first arrived here, I thought I was alone. I thought I had nothing in common with anyone, least of all humans. But now, here we are. We've managed to survive. We've learned from each other. And maybe that's the way forward for all of us." There was a long pause as Ryan absorbed Torin's words. Amara, too, seemed lost in thought, her gaze flickering to the fire. "You're right," Amara said after a moment, her voice calm but steady. "We may come from different worlds, but we share something deeper. We've all been through loss. We've all had to fight for survival. And that's what makes us who we are." Torin nodded, feeling a surge of something unfamiliar within him. Hope, maybe. Hope that there could be a future here, on this planet, despite the challenges that still lay ahead. The pureborn were relentless, but Torin knew that they couldn't keep running forever. They would have to face the group sooner or later. The next few days were a blur of activity. Torin, Ryan, and Amara worked together to reinforce their camp and gather supplies. Torin learned to craft weapons, simple tools that could help them defend themselves if the pureborn returned. Ryan taught Torin more about Earth's survival tactics, while Amara continued to share her vast knowledge of the land. There was a growing sense of teamwork among them, a shared purpose that kept them moving forward. One night as they sat by the fire, Torin turned to Amara with a question that had been on his mind for some time. "Why did you help me?" he asked, his voice quiet. "You didn't have to. You knew the risks. The pureborn are powerful." Amara looked at him, her green eyes steady. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply. "The pureborn are dangerous, but they don't define us. We are more than what they want us to be. I couldn't just stand by and let them destroy someone who was only trying to survive. And I couldn't let you die alone out here." Her words, simple as they were, struck Torin deeply. For the first time in his life, he felt truly seen. He wasn't just an alien scout on a mission. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a person, someone who mattered, even to a human who had every reason to see him as a threat. The following week, the three of them were forced to make a difficult decision. After hearing rumors from travelers about an approaching pureborn strike force, they knew they couldn't stay in their current location for much longer. The time had come to face the pureborn, whether they were ready or not. "We need to take the fight to them," Torin said, his voice firm as they gathered around their camp. "We can't keep running forever." Ryan and Amara exchanged a glance. Then, without hesitation, they both nodded. Ryan clapped Torin on the back. "Let's do it," he said. "We've survived this far. We can finish this." As they prepared for the coming battle, Torin couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose swelling inside him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about standing up for what they had built together. It was about proving that the bond they shared, alien, human, and everything in between, was stronger than any threat the universe could throw at them. With renewed determination, Torin, Ryan, and Amara set out for the pureborn stronghold. They weren't just fighting for survival now. They were fighting for their future. And for the first time since he had crash-landed on Earth, Torin felt like he was exactly where he needed to be.